Welcome to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to people about their stories with VEDS, Marfan, Loeys-Dietz, and related vascular and aortic connective tissue conditions. This is your host, Katie, and before we get into the show, I want to remind you that the views, information, and opinions in this podcast are those of the individuals involved, and the information presented does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Any opinions that I express in this podcast are my own and not of my employer. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new season of Staying Connected. You may have noticed something new in the intro to this show. This podcast is growing, and we're going to start hearing from people with related conditions to VEDS this season. Conditions like Marfan syndrome and Loeys-Dietz, which have so many overlapping features and experiences to VEDS. I believe it's important to raise awareness of these conditions as well, and I'm looking forward to sharing some interviews with some wonderful people with Marfan and Loeys-Dietz this season. This show will release every other Saturday through September, so make sure you subscribe on your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes. Today, we're going to talk to Ashton Tanner, who was diagnosed with VEDS or Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome about a year ago after a spontaneous coronary artery dissection or SCAD, and her mother's medical event a few weeks prior led to some puzzle pieces finally coming together. Before we go over to the interview with Ashton, did you know that Staying Connected has been around now for more than 5 years? I started this show in 2018 as a way to raise awareness of VEDS and connect with other people with it. And what started out as a once-monthly podcast has become such an incredibly meaningful and important part of my life. The show reaches people now on all 7 continents, in countries like the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Ireland, New Zealand, Norway, India, Chile, South Africa, and more. And I'm excited to announce that as of this past season, we have officially landed in someone's headphones in Antarctica. If you want to support this show and help it continue to reach people around the world, join my Patreon. For $5 or $10 a month, you can support the production of this show and other content about VEDS and now related conditions like Marfan and Loeys-Dietz. I've linked the Patreon in the episode show notes, and I just want to give a shout out to my patrons who have already been supporting the show. This podcast means so much to me, and I couldn't do it without your support, so thank you so much. My top tier patrons are listed in the episode show notes. Stick around at the end of the episode for some information about events coming up soon and ways you can get involved. Don't forget, you can always support the show by simply sharing this podcast with people you know. This helps us raise awareness together and reach people who need to hear it. Thank you so much for your support. Hey Ashton, thank you so much for joining me on the show and sharing your story with VEDS with everybody. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself to people who don't know you?
Hi, yes, happy to be here. My name's Ashton Tanner from San Diego.
When were you diagnosed with VEDS?
So I was diagnosed within the last year. I want to say my official diagnosis was end of July, beginning of August of 2022. And my first major event was in June of 22.
So then you had a major event right before your diagnosis, and that kind of led to it?
Which helped to lead to it. And so my mother had an event just a few weeks prior to me that I honestly think kind of helped save my life and guide doctors in the right direction for additional genetic testing for myself that she had just started for herself.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on what that event was, or like what were all the pieces that kind of came together to paint this picture?
So in May of 22, my mom they found that she had a blood clot in her leg. It had been causing her a lot of pain. She thought she had a really bad pulled muscle that just wasn't getting better. So she knew that she needed to go in and get it checked out. They found that it was a blood clot that just was not resolving and healing like they had hoped it would. She ended up having to go in for surgery. And during that surgery, prior to that surgery, she mentioned to the vascular surgeon, I think I have something with my connective tissue going on. And of course, the vascular surgeon was like, we'll see how that goes. And after the surgery, confirmed to her, you absolutely have something going on with your connective tissue. And I think that you may have something called VEDS, and started her genetic testing at that point. My event was just a few weeks later in June. I had what's called a spontaneous coronary artery dissection. So one of the arteries to my heart dissected, causing a heart attack. I had just gotten home from a family vacation. Within about 30 minutes of getting home, I started my laundry, started unpacking all the kids' belongings, and just trying to wind down from the trip and the long drive. I had what I felt was low blood sugar at the time. So I had my husband get me some fruit, and I just sat down, ate for a little bit. I felt better and decided, though, that I should probably still rest because it just felt a little bit off. I sat on the couch with my children. We started watching TV, and probably about 30 minutes into that, I felt a giant wave just rush over me. I knew that something was definitely off and very wrong. I just didn't understand exactly what was going on. I remember I asked my daughter, as calmly as I could, can you please go get Daddy and have Daddy come here? My husband came out, and I remember telling my husband, please have the kids go to their room. I don't feel well. Something's wrong. I need you to call my mom. So we called my mom, and I think by the time the kids went to the room and we called my mom, I was pretty hysteric, and I knew that I just felt horrible. I was in so much pain. I got super nauseous. After my husband talked with my mom, they decided that they should call 911, which I'm so glad that they did. The ambulance came, they got here, and I remember at that point I was on the floor in my living room. I remember all of the paramedics coming in, and I knew that by looking at me, they really had zero idea what was going on. I was 33 at the time. I think relatively healthy looking. Heart attacks don't happen generally to 33-year-olds. So they weren't too sure what to do, but I was like hysteric, and they ended up taking me to the ambulance to do an EKG. I remember being in the ambulance, and I had so much pressure on my chest, and everything just started to be a blur. But I remember very specifically at the moment that the paramedic told the paramedic that was helping me, she's having a STEMI. And I remember looking over at the paramedic, and I don't have a medical background. I'm a teacher by trade. And I looked over at the paramedic and I said, I'm having a heart attack. I'm having a heart attack, right? And at that point she said, don't worry, we're going. And I just got to the hospital, found out, heart attack was due to a dissection. When you have a heart attack, they do an angiogram. So they go in through one of your veins, either in your arm or through your groin, to see what's going on, where the blockage is. Not knowing I had VEDS at the time, and when they went in, I had a tear in my arm that night, and I got something called compartment syndrome. And compartment syndrome, which I'm sure you've heard of at some point, but it's when you have internal bleeding and swelling going on at somewhere within your body. Well, mine was in my arm. So because of that tear, I had to end up going in for 2 surgeries while I was in the ICU already for the heart attack. I have a wonderful battle scar from it. It takes up my entire arm. I'm waiting for this summer to come around when I stop wearing long sleeves, and when somebody asks, oh, what happened to your arm? I can say it was a shark with a really good dentist, really good orthodontist.
So they, that's hilarious. Always make up good stories for your scars, right?
Yeah. way easier than the whole background to it.
That is really funny. So that was from the access point to the angiogram.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So then at that point, like, you're in the hospital, you have this angiogram, you have compartment syndrome because of the bleeding from the insertion site for the catheter of the angiogram, not another kind of catheter.
Yeah.
At that point, like, had your mom told you that the doctor thought she might have VEDS? Like, did you already kind of have an idea now that this is related to VEDS?
So I remember being wheeled in from the ambulance into the hospital, and I kept, as soon as they get you into a room, they start asking questions and going through a whole list. And I remember saying to pretty much every doctor that walked in at that time, my mom is having testing done for a genetic condition called VEDS. I think I have the same thing. And at that point, I really didn't understand what that connection could be or what that exactly meant for myself. But in my mind, saying that to them was going to help them to determine the best treatment, which I think it actually did, because I didn't have to have any stents placed. They went in, found where the dissection was, and with the background of it could be a connective tissue issue going on, they were able to make that call that a stent was not going to be the best option for me at the time.
What did they do?
Basically, it was rest. It was making sure my body was able to heal and note that there was no additional clotting going on. I know the week after in the hospital, a giant blur. Within that time, too, was the 2 additional surgeries for my arm.
Yeah.
So I think it was a lot of rest and just watching for how I was healing.
Yeah. So you're 33 at this point. Did you have any idea growing up that you might have something? Or was this like all brand new at 33?
Looking back throughout life, my family and I would always joke around that we had something going on. I was like, oh, that weird family thing. I always bruised extremely easily growing up. My friends would always joke that they would just barely tap me and my veins would pop. I had some different things throughout my pregnancies that came up that could have been indicators. Different medical things growing up that could have been indicators. My family as well had different things come up that should have been indicators.
Mm-hmm.
But they never raised any red flags. So after my mom having her incident and then me having the heart attack just a few weeks after her, I think finally it was enough for a doctor to say, oh, maybe something's off.
Yeah.
I wish we would have known sooner. I think a lot of precautions could have been in place, and I would have done things differently in life. But you know what? I'm just grateful that now we know, and moving forward, that helps me to make better medical choices for myself.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So now it's been, about a year since your diagnosis, and you were diagnosed in 2022. When I was diagnosed in 2017, there wasn't a lot out there, and I think for a lot of people that is the case. I'm interested in what the experience was like getting diagnosed in 2022. Like what I know you've met people, and just what was that experience like?
I think that I am just so grateful from hearing different people's stories about earlier diagnosis through 2022. I'm really grateful that when I was diagnosed, there was already a community in place. And being able to reach out, and with VEDS being as rare as it is, and there being a community already in place, and some different protocols that I was able to share with my doctors, different doctors and scientists that are already working towards gaining more knowledge on VEDS, I think it makes a world of a difference. It made this process feel a little less alone. I've met some really wonderful people in the last year that also have VEDS. I've met some wonderful doctors that were out of network for me, and wonderful nurses that had the experience in VEDS, and it just really it's made a big difference in this whole process. It's still a lot to handle and a lot to process. I think I'm at a much better place now than I was in the beginning. Having that group and that community made all those unknowns a little bit more manageable.
Mm-hmm. And how did you manage then kind of planning, or, so you're 33, you have a heart attack, now you know you have VEDS. What kind of steps did you take to start, like emergency preparedness, or what's been different that you weren't planning on doing?
So as far as planning goes, so before the heart attack, I already had a trust in place with my husband for our family, and after finding out about VEDS after the heart attack, and then kind of going down that route of finding out other medical things that are also going on, at that point it leaves you in this sense of just you've lost all control. You've lost all control of the life that you had in place. Where do you go from there? How do you plan? What can you do? So looking at it, something that I would always say to my husband in the very beginning, because everything was so unknown and so uncertain, that we plan for the worst, but we hope for the best. What I realized was in my control and what I could do moving forward was I could take the steps to plan for, if I wasn't here, plan for what that looked like for my family. We were able to update our trust. We were able to update guardianship for my children if there was ever an emergency that it was needed. I was able to get some additional medical pieces and financial pieces in place for my children. It really just helped to kind of, I guess, trying to think of how to best to word this, have control over something in the situation that made me feel productive and able to push forward. But it's still ever changing. I mean, this past year has been kind of like a rug was pulled out from underneath me. Life has changed completely, but I'm still me. I'm still the same me with the same hopes and dreams and goals. And I just have learned over the past year that I just have to go about it in a different way. So, in addition to what was in control or what is in control, is also planning for future medical events or potential medical events that could happen. When I found out about the VEDS diagnosis, I also was able to get connected with the VEDS Movement as far as what they had in place for some different protocols that I was able to show to my geneticists and different specialists that I had. It kind of, in a way, just really helped me to focus on what are areas that I do need to look into. What are some steps that I can take to be proactive? So things like having an emergency binder or having a special emergency paper printed so that when I have to go to the emergency room, my husband can give it to triage, and hopefully they understand the severity of the moment a little bit more. I realized with that information too that I was able to advocate for some body scans to go forward with a baseline. If, maybe there was other things that I didn't know about that had already been happening. At that time too, after doing the scans, I did find out there was additional things. I had 2 aneurysms in my head, 1 in my neck. I had a dissection in my celiac trunk already. Because of the heart attack, I've been dealing with ongoing chest spasms and pains throughout the last year. So I've been in countless times to the emergency room or hospital, and each time when they do a scan, I found some different lung changes. I had a micro perforation in my colon in December that at first was misdiagnosed as something completely different, but it makes so much more sense that it was the micro tear, and just being able to just have that protocol book just made me feel so much more supported in an unsupported situation. As we know VEDS is considered rare, or if it's not truly rare, it's grossly underdiagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
So out of all the specialists that I've seen, I don't think very many had ever even heard of VEDS. They've heard of it, EDS, but the vascular type, pretty unaware of altogether. So being able to provide the specialist with some literature of these are things to look for, these are things that we can do, it's helped me feel more reassured in different situations.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think it's so good to know that those resources are helpful, and I know that there's always more resources to build too. Is there anything else that would have been helpful or like that you wish existed?
Yes, actually, absolutely. And I don't know if this is something that's even possible at the moment. My hope, though, is that in the future it is. Although there's this wonderful the VEDS movement and there's this paperwork in place, there is not a lot of awareness for VEDS out there. I so very wish that there was, to begin with, better tools to help diagnose. I mean, there was plenty of things as a child, or even during my pregnancies, young adulthood, there's plenty of things that could have been red flags to doctors that never were. My mom had different things that could have been red flags that never were. One of my sisters had a perforation of her intestines and was misdiagnosed for a good 2 years before my mom and I got the diagnosis, and she was able to then show her doctors, look at, this is what's going on in my family, this is connected. So I think just better protocols in place to get people to a geneticist. Going to a doctor, I wish that there was something in place that if they weren't aware and they didn't have a background in VEDS, that if they're you hope that they're open to learning more. But two, if they're not and they don't have the resources, because we know our medical system is very impacted. Doctors are overworked and there's not enough time in the day. But if they're not able to learn more and be open to different options for patients that may have VEDS, something in place to automatically refer us out to the specialists that are out there. Even if they're out of network, just something in place that triggers that out of network referral. That would be life-changing. And then the third, just better protocols for emergency rooms. I've had some different situations in the past year where I've been in the emergency room waiting for hours on end, not knowing if I had another tear somewhere, not knowing if I was potentially having another lead up to a heart attack. And there's something in place that helped make it a little bit more smooth of a transition, whether it be noting on a chart that shows that, yes, this patient has VEDS, let's get them scanned and blood work right away. And then if they don't see anything, let me wait in your emergency room for 6 more hours,
right?
Whatever it turns out to
make
be.
Make it backwards, right? Like make the wait come after the scan.
Yeah, which I would be way more comfortable in that setting. That's a very good question, because there are things that could be helpful.
Yeah, and I think there's so much more to do always. There is a patient care coordination note that your doctor can add into Epic if they use an Epic system. So I can send you, I'll put that link in the episode show notes too, but I know that it's not perfect, right? Like
Yeah,
It's
I have actually something in my medical file,
Mhm.
but for some reason, when it lists medical history, it keeps changing the order of different
Oh,
things.
yeah.
One of the last times I went to the emergency room, they couldn't even see that I had a heart attack in June. My husband's like, she had a coronary artery dissection with a heart attack, and they're like, I don't see this on her chart here. Look at it. Like, and then it was all the way. They had to keep scrolling through the page, but it was all the way at the very bottom. I just like, there has to be something better in place,
There
like a
has to
giant
be.
red flag that just says like, look.
Yes. Yes, there has to be. I mean, I wish there was something that was like a big pop-up or big flashing red, like something
Yeah,
really, really obvious because getting through that emergency room is so difficult. It's just, and if you've already had a life-threatening event and then you go and you're just like, you think you're having another one and then you can't get through, it's so terrifying. It's so terrifying.
it's extremely terrifying. There's a lot of anxiety knowing that, okay, I have to go back to the emergency room. How long is this going to take? Like, am I going to be taken seriously? Another one of the challenging parts with VEDS is on the outside, we look healthy. We look like every normal, healthy person from day to day. And, I think that is a big point as well, as far as like being younger and having these situations happen. Oftentimes, I think that like when women go in, we're looked at as we're having anxiety, having a panic attack of some sort, that it's more of an emotional response than an actual physical response. So that's actually another thing that I wish could kind of tie into protocols and change, as far as if there's a checklist, you go through that checklist before you tell
Make
somebody that,
assumptions.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. And I think there's a lot of documented research on the biases that women face when they go into the healthcare system. I think there's a lot. I know there's a lot out there already on that issue and not specific to VEDS, but I, I think it's got to be exacerbated when you actually like when you have something so life threatening and you like as you said like you do look completely healthy on the outside. So it is something that needs to be addressed as well. What was it like after your diagnosis, to move forward with the relationships, like the friendships and things that you'd already had, or colleagues? Like, did you tell a lot of people that you had this, or how did you do that?
I think that in the last few months, I've been a little bit more open with sharing with people. In the beginning, with everything still unknown, I was able to share with my closest friends. And I feel so grateful that I have a really good group of close friends that are so supportive. I have a wonderful, supportive family, that being able to have people to talk to through different situations was very helpful. I think besides that, I can tend to be a very private person. I just sometimes would rather just keep things in. But I'm realizing, though, with this and different things that keep coming up with VEDS, it's helpful to make those connections with others. It's helpful to be able to bounce an idea off of somebody or a question. And although it's hard for others to relate to, it does make a world of a difference to have a support system. And also that comes into play with the community that's out there already with VEDS. And I've been able to join into some of the support groups online, and that's made a world of a difference, just to bounce questions off and somebody be able to say, oh, that happened to me. This is what my doctor suggested, and this is how I made it through this different scenario or situation. Because without that, it would be very isolating. Yeah. So very alone otherwise, I guess.
Yeah, I think our community is really, really wonderful at that support, and it's really like an immeasurable benefit to have this community of people that want to help each other. And like you said, like I had this too. And even just getting through that if it's an emotional period of time, like how did you get through that medical emergency and all of the emotional stuff that came with it? Like there's just so much of that support in our community, and I just love it so, so much. And I'm so glad that you got kind of like immediately pulled into that. That makes me happy.
So grateful. So grateful. I can't even explain it in words. It really, it's made a world of a difference. I know, like for myself too, I have experienced some medical PTSD from just the heart attack and things moving forward. And I've been able to make connections with people that have kind of steered me in the right direction of like, what are some steps moving forward and how do I work through these different stages of, I guess, just PTSD, the whole situation. And I mean, you can Google different things, but it's not the same as talking to somebody that's also been through the similar situations, and much more reassuring talking to a human. And I don't know, I guess that's another thing to add to like something I wish was known more or something that could change. It's just that, I guess, to humanize the whole VEDS disorder. We're not just, this elusive Bigfoot or Loch Ness monster. Like there is a good chunk of the population that has this, and we're humans still living our life day to day and learning how to live with this and how to push forward and not allow it to take this lifetime from us and take the joys of this lifetime from us.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. If somebody else was let's say somebody joined the group today and they were just diagnosed and asking for advice, what kind of advice would you give them?
This was advice that was given to me, actually, from somebody in the community as well. And I think it resonates so much in my day to day, as far as the advice being, give yourself time. If somebody tells you that you're going to be healing within 9 months and you'll start feeling back to yourself, or you'll start feeling just back into your normal everyday groove, give yourself another 9 months after that, and give yourself just grace and peace to live day by day. And it's okay if sometimes it's minute by minute, because it is like a roller coaster, but things do get better. And when things start getting better and you feel like you can kind of clear your thought process of, okay, now I can start preparing and prepping and doing what is in my control, doors start opening again. Hope comes back, and you're still going to be you. Nothing can take that away from you. It's just learning a different way to go about your day to day.
That's a great message.
And then there's people that you can call at any time that are just so generous and kind. And when you're having a hard time, reach out.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you're having trouble finding the community and you are diagnosed with VEDS, I will link some resources in the episode show notes for you. One final question for you is, what do you want medical professionals to know about either VEDS or living with it, or any aspect?
I think that goes back into being open to learning, knowing that people with VEDS are out there. We look like your normal day-to-day people, and we are your normal day-to-day people. Our bodies just don't necessarily respond as a normal day-to-day person, as you would expect a normal day-to-day person's body to respond. If you are not open to learning more about it, please refer us out to specialists that can truly help us and can truly help our quality of life. And I guess also thank you to the medical professionals. I don't, you're asking like what I'd like them to know, and a complete shout out to the medical professionals because they work hard, and we know that they're overwhelmed. We know that there's so many things going on, but thank you to those that can take the time to learn more about VEDS and help us, because I think our overall goal, or at least what I see my goal, is that awareness to VEDS is going to really help families in the future. It's going to help lessen their heartache and pain, and it's just going to make VEDS a lot more, I guess, manageable could be the word.
Yeah. And I think that helps us on both sides, right? Like the more medical professionals know about it, or aware of it, or are at least aware of it enough to say, this isn't what I can handle, like let me send you to somebody. Like I think that
Absolutely.
helps the medical professionals, but it also helps us. And I think together, like if we can make it a better experience for the people who come behind us, that just means the most to me in the world. And I really, I want to echo your thanks too that you gave to the medical professionals, and just kind of amplify that, because there have been some really, really wonderful medical professionals involved in our community that like go above and beyond. And thank you. You know who you are. I really, really appreciate you so much, and you're making our lives better. So thank you so much. Thank you, Ashton, for coming onto the podcast and sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Katie, too. And thank you for everything that you do. You are an amazing person.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Staying Connected, featuring Ashton Tanner, who has VEDS or Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. The next episode of this season, on July 15th, features Maya Brown-Zimmerman, who has Marfan syndrome. If you want to get involved in our community, the biggest upcoming events are the VEDS Camp, hosted by the Ehlers-Danlos Society in partnership with the VEDS Movement at Camp Joy, Ohio from July 7th to 9th, and the Marfan Foundation's conference in Chicago, July 13th to 16th. These events are quite literally right around the corner, so if you want to attend, make sure to check out the episode show notes for some links to register. Don't forget to subscribe to Staying Connected on your podcast player so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you like this show, I hope you will consider sharing it with your friends on social media to help us raise awareness of VEDS together. You can also support the production of this podcast by joining my Patreon. Thanks so much, and I will see you soon.